Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. I have a porch on the side of my house, and there's evidence that water has been getting into the inside of the porch and causing staining on some of the paintwork. If you live in Wales, and probably some people listening to this and watching this live in Wales, you may say to yourself, well, living in Wales, of course, that's going to happen. That's natural because of the wind and the rain and the weather of it all. And anyway, you're halfway up the side of a valley, Catherine, so stop complaining. Anyway, I decided to look into it. And I know someone who's actually a trained carpenter, has spent years training as a carpenter and very, very good at it. Came round and had a look at the porch and examined it and said, well, can't work out where the water's coming in. We had a long conversation and walked round and round looking at it. And they said, well, I think the only way, you're going to have to clad the outside or to stop water getting onto the wall, or you're going to have to kind of, paint the inside with something waterproof so the water can't get in, etc. And off they went. Okay, fine. So that's probably the most capable person. Then someone else, a friend, came round who's not a trained carpenter in any way. And I said, do you want to have a look at this porch? And we started walking around the porch, and this person, also a man, these are both men, said, well, water's getting in there, and pointed at a tiny little pinpoint hole in the exterior of the woodwork on the porch. And water's getting in there, and there, and there. And by the time he'd finished, he'd identified about 35 different places that water was probably getting in. And I actually had a conversation with him later on. I said, how come you noticed all that, which can obviously just be fixed really easily? It's very straightforward. And as he was pointing it out to me, I thought, of course, I see that immediately now. Why didn't I see it before? And I was talking to this person later and saying, well, how come you saw all that and you're not a carpenter? And, and I realized in the conversation that there's this tendency to assume what we think someone in front of us is good at and what they're going to be able to do. And we also assume, in a way, what the nature of a problem is and some idea about possibly what the solution might be. So this was really interesting to me because it brought home to me that it's not safe to assume that I know everything about someone's capability. So in relation to this particular problem, the first person, the carpenter, actually lacks a certain capability at spotting and understanding a problem. And that problem is perhaps directly related to carpentry in terms of the solution. But the other person with no qualifications of any kind is actually much, much more capable in regard to spotting the nature of the problem and what would be the simplest solution. So you may be rolling your eyes at this point and saying, yeah, Catherine, we all know this. We all know someone who's just surprisingly capable, but they're not qualified. But even though we know this, do we apply it to life in general? Or do we go through life assuming that people fit neatly into boxes, pigeonholes, and that we can therefore predict and assume what they're going to be good at, what their qualities are, what their faculties are? And I think one of the things that keeps this sort of mentality in place is this misunderstanding we have about human beings, which is that people are simple. People are not simple. People are highly, highly complex. One person described it as, if you imagine each human being as a diamond, where the diamond has been cut with many, many, many faces to the diamond. And each face is an aspect of that person. So when you're standing on one side of the diamond and looking at a particular facet, that's what you can see. And you may then make certain assumptions about what's on the other facets, or you may even forget that there are other facets. Either way, if you make those assumptions or forget there are other facets, you immediately are misjudging that person. So what I take from this is that the safest way is to assume that we know almost nothing about other people. And the more we get to know somebody, it doesn't mean that there's less and less of them for us to understand and to learn. And now this is really interesting to me because it means that knowing other people and experiencing other people in our lives is an ever expansive, limitless journey and adventure. Very exciting and wonderful. But on the other hand, in reality, in practical life, sometimes we need to make decisions or ask someone to do something for us or say no or decide whether to spend time with somebody. We have to make judgments, actually, about people based on limited experience. So my suggestion is, if we can simply remember that the information and the experience we have of this person is extremely limited, even when we think it's profoundly deep and comprehensive, that may then save us. Because what that does is it helps us to remain open to discovering more as we get closer and more involved with that person. And this, I think, is something which could really help us in our individual relationships with each other, but also in terms of our impressions and our judgments and our feelings and our perspectives on other people who we don't know. People we see in the news, people we see on Zoom, people we hear about. So long as we can remember that we cannot possibly know more than a minority of information about that person, and you may argue with me about this, but this is genuinely what I believe, then that can help us remain open to new information and new experiences and impressions coming in. So I'm going to wish you a great week and invite you to really crank the perception and the assumptions open and take another look at the people in your life. And of course, do this to yourself. Take another look at yourself. There's always more to be experienced about yourself. There are more faculties and qualities and beautiful aspects of you yet to be experienced and discovered. So there's the people in your life, there's you yourself, and there's the people who you don't know, but who you hear about and think about and watch and listen to. So have a fantastic week filled with openness and wonder and fresh perspectives. Check out my other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And please check out my other work on beingspace.world and freedomofspirit.world. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.